The great hall was filled with voices. Men and women from many worlds sat at long tables and spoke about war and peace. At the center of the hall, the leaders of the council raised their voices louder than the rest. They spoke with pride about their armies, their ships, and their victories. When the name of Earth came into the talk, laughter spread across the hall. They said that humans feared war. They said that men and women from Earth were too weak, too emotional, and too soft to ever stand in a real fight. One man leaned back in his chair and said that humans could only talk about peace. Another woman laughed and said they would run the moment they saw blood. The hall filled with mocking voices. Not one leader believed that Earth could fight. They thought humans would always hide behind others, while the council laughed and traded words. No one knew what was happening far away on Earth. Deep inside thick jungles, hidden from the eyes of outsiders, a regiment of men and women was training. They were not weak. They were not afraid. They had grown up in mud, rain, and heat. They had learned to move in silence, to strike fast, and to endure pain. These fighters were called the Jungle Special Forces. Their training ground was not polished stone or wide plains. It was tangled vines, dark rivers, and thick trees. Every day they carried heavy packs through swamps. They cut paths with knives. They learned to survive with little food, little water, and no rest. They knew how to set traps and how to vanish into the green. They were not the kind of soldiers the council expected. They were something else. In the camp, a young man named Jack tied his boots tight and stood beside his squad. Sweat ran down his face, but he did not wipe it away. Next to him, Daniel checked the rifle in his hands. Maria cleaned her blade, her eyes sharp as steel. Claire pulled mud across her skin to hide her scent from animals and enemies alike. None of them spoke much, but each carried a fire inside. Orders came down from the Queen herself, a woman who ruled Earth with firm resolve. She had seen the words of the council. She had heard their laughter. She knew that if Earth did not prove itself, it would always be treated as weak. Her command was clear. She told her jungle regiment that they would not bow their heads. They would not live under shame. They would stand as proof that humans feared nothing, not even war. The special forces trained until night fell, then trained again until the sun rose. They crawled through mud until their bodies were black with dirt. They crossed rivers with rifles held above their heads. They ran until their legs burned and their lungs screamed. But none of them stopped. They knew what was at stake. Far away, in the shining halls of the council, another man raised his voice. He said that humans were only useful for farming and trade. Another said that humans would never be warriors. The laughter continued, loud and careless. They did not see the eyes of Jack, Daniel, Maria, and Claire staring through the leaves. They did not feel the ground tremble under the steps of the regiment. They did not know the Queen's words still echoed in their minds. Jack looked at his squad as the rain poured down on the camp. He said in a quiet voice that the time was near. Daniel nodded. Maria smiled, though it was not the smile of joy, but of someone ready to strike. Claire said that the council would soon learn the truth. The jungle answered with thunder. The river carried the sound far. And in that moment, though the council still laughed across the stars, the soldiers of Earth prepared for the fight that would change everything. The jungle was alive with sound. Birds cried from the trees, insects filled the air, and rivers rushed through the thick forest. In the middle of this wild land, the special forces moved like shadows. Their boots pressed into wet soil, their blades cut through vines, and their eyes searched for danger at every step. Jack led the squad across a narrow path. His uniform was torn, and his skin was covered with dirt, but his focus was sharp. Daniel walked behind him, carrying heavy gear on his back, the weight pulling at his shoulders but not slowing him down. Maria followed close, her knife always in her hand, ready for use. Claire walked last, scanning the trees and ground, always watching for movement. Each of them carried the look of men and women who had no time for fear. The camp they had built was hidden under thick leaves. Branches and mud covered their shelters, making them blend with the forest. At night, fires were kept small, so the smoke would vanish in the dark sky. Meals were plain, often nothing more than dried meat or roots pulled from the ground. They slept in shifts, never all at once. The jungle was their shield, but it was also their enemy, and they had to respect it. Training never stopped. Even after long marches, they drilled until their muscles ached. Jack set up ambush lines using ropes and spikes. Daniel built traps along the rivers, sharp branches hidden underwater. Maria practiced silent movement, stepping over leaves without making a sound. Claire worked on climbing high into the trees, turning branches into watchtowers. The Queen's words stayed in their minds. She had told them that the honor of Earth rested on their shoulders. She had said that the Council believed humans would never fight, and that it was their duty to prove the Council wrong. Each soldier carried that command like a stone in their chest. It gave them strength, but it also reminded them of the weight of failure. One evening, rain poured heavy over the jungle. Water beat down on leaves and soaked through the soldiers' clothes. Jack stood in the rain, his rifle across his chest, watching his squad train in the mud. Daniel pushed through the swamp with a heavy pack. Maria rolled under barbed vines, moving low and fast. Claire climbed up a wet tree trunk and balanced herself on a high branch. Their movements were steady, their faces calm, as if the storm around them was nothing more than air. When the training ended, they sat under a shelter made of thick leaves. Daniel said the Council would not expect them to strike so hard. Maria said the Council thought of humans as weak, but soon they would know better. Claire added that the jungle itself would fight with them, and that fear would spread fast. When the enemy realized they could not control it, Jack listened, and then told them that the time to move was near. He said that every day of training was another step toward war, and that when the command came, they would be ready. Far away, in the bright cities of the Council, the leaders still mocked Earth. They did not believe stories of human soldiers. They said that Earth had no army worth notice, no skill in battle, no men or women who could face real war. Their voices echoed through the halls, but none of them knew that deep in the jungle, the special forces were already preparing to strike. As night fell, the soldiers wrapped their gear and checked their weapons. The rain stopped, and the forest grew quiet. The sound of insects faded, leaving only the crack of branches in the distance. Jack looked out into the darkness and felt the pull of coming battle. He said nothing, but his grip on his rifle tightened. The jungle was no longer just a place of training. It was a weapon in itself. The soldiers had become part of it. Their bodies moved with the trees, their minds sharpened like blades. They were no longer only men and women. They were hunters, waiting for the order that would carry them into the heart of war. The night was dark and heavy with silence. Clouds covered the sky, and no light reached the jungle floor. In that silence, the special forces prepared for their first strike. Jack gathered his squad around a map drawn in the dirt. His voice was low but firm. He pointed to the path where enemy soldiers had set up their camp. He explained how they would move, how they would strike, and how they would vanish before the enemy could react. Daniel listened with sharp focus, nodding at every word. Maria's eyes burned with a quiet fire as she tightened the straps on her gear. Claire checked her rifle and whispered that she would take the high ground once they reached the camp. Each soldier understood the plan. Each knew their role. The Queen's command had reached them days before. She had sent word that the Council forces were moving against Earth. She did not ask her soldiers to defend. She ordered them to strike first. She told them that fear must change sides, that the enemy must learn that humans would not bend or break. Her message was clear. The Jungle Regiment was the blade of Earth, and the time had come to cut. Jack gave the order to move. The squad slipped into the forest, their bodies blending with the shadows.
Ow.
Their boots made no sound on the wet ground. Their faces were painted with mud to hide the pale of their skin. They carried rifles, knives, and small charges of fire ready to set traps. Hours passed as they moved through the jungle. Rain dripped from the leaves above. The sound of distant drums echoed from the enemy camp. When the squad reached a ridge, they stopped. Below them lay a wide clearing filled with tents and fires. Soldiers laughed and drank by the flames. Weapons lay stacked in careless piles. Guards stood at the edge of the camp, but their eyes were tired, their hands loose on their rifles. Jack raised his hand, and the squad spread out like shadows breaking apart. Daniel slid into the tall grass and crawled toward the supply wagons. Maria crept along the far side, her knife in hand. Claire climbed a tree, her rifle balanced against her shoulder, her eye fixed on the camp below. Jack moved to the center, waiting for the right moment. The signal came with the cry of a bird. Claire fired her first shot, and a guard fell without a sound. At the same time, Daniel lit a fuse that ran into the supply wagons. Flames burst high, turning the night into fire. Panic spread in the camp as men shouted and ran. Maria moved fast, her blade cutting down soldiers who stumbled in confusion. Jack stormed through the smoke, his rifle spitting fire into the crowd. He aimed true and never slowed. He called out orders to keep the squad moving. Daniel threw another charge into a line of tents, and fire spread like a beast across the clearing. Claire fired again and again, each shot striking before the enemy could find cover. The enemy tried to form lines, but the jungle itself turned against them. Smoke blinded their eyes. Fire split their ranks. Shadows moved among them, striking from all sides. Men cried out, but their voices were swallowed by the roar of flames. The camp that had been filled with laughter minutes before now lay in chaos. Jack called for retreat after the mission was done. The squad melted back into the forest. They left behind a camp in ruin, bodies scattered in mud and fires eating through the night. By the time the enemy could gather their strength, the jungle had already swallowed the humans whole. The squad regrouped at the ridge. Their clothes were burned, their faces black with smoke, but their eyes were bright with victory. Daniel said the enemy had lost more than men and supplies. They had lost the belief that humans were weak. Maria agreed and said fear had entered their hearts. Claire looked back at the burning camp and whispered that this was only the beginning. Jack stood silent for a moment, then told them that the Queen would hear of their success. He said that tonight was the first cut, and many more would follow. The squad moved back into the jungle, leaving only fire and silence behind. The smoke from the burning camp had not cleared when word of the attack spread to the council chambers. Messengers arrived in a rush, their faces pale, their voices shaking. They reported that the human regiment had struck with speed and skill. They spoke of fire, traps, and shadows that killed without warning. The great hall grew quiet. Leaders who had once laughed at Earth now whispered among themselves. One man slammed his hand on the table and demanded answers. How could a handful of humans cause such damage to a trained army? A woman said it was a trick, nothing more than luck. Another voice rose, saying that it was only the beginning. Fear spread through the room like a wave, but none of them would admit it aloud. Back in the jungle, Jack and his squad rested under thick trees. Their clothes were wet, their skin marked with cuts, but their eyes showed no weakness. Daniel cleaned his rifle in silence, his hands moving with care. Maria sharpened her blade, her face calm but her mind burning with thoughts of the next fight. Claire watched the horizon, waiting for any sign of movement. Jack spoke to them in a steady voice. He said that the enemy would not sit idle after such a loss. He said that stronger forces would come, and the jungle would be tested again. Daniel nodded and said they would strike harder. Maria smiled with sharp confidence and said the enemy was already afraid. Claire kept her gaze fixed ahead and said fear would only grow. The Queen received word of the victory and sent her reply. Her message was short but strong. She praised the regiment and reminded them that this was only the first step. She told them to keep striking until the council no longer dared to mock Earth. Her words lit fire in their hearts. Not even in exhaustion, the soldiers stood ready. The council prepared their next move. They sent larger forces into the jungles, believing numbers would crush the humans. They set camps deeper into the forest, bringing more weapons and supplies. Their commanders gave strict orders to be alert, but even then fear followed them. Men whispered of shadows in the trees. They spoke of gunfire that came from nowhere, of traps hidden in the ground, of voices in the night that vanished when chased. The special forces watched from the cover of trees. Jack pointed out weak spots in the enemy's defenses. Daniel counted supply wagons and fuel barrels. Maria marked the guard rotations. Claire climbed high to see the layout of the camp. Every detail mattered. Every mistake of the enemy became an opening. At night, the regiment struck again. Daniel slipped into the camp and cut the fuel lines of the vehicles. Maria moved silently through the shadows, taking out guards before they could raise alarm. Claire fired from the trees, her shots precise and quick. Jack led the main attack, storming through the chaos with his squad at his back. Explosions tore through the camp as fire spread from wagon to wagon. Soldiers shouted and ran, but every path led into traps set earlier in the day. Spikes hidden in pits, ropes tied to trees that swung heavy logs, and rivers where boats had been cut loose. The jungle itself seemed to fight with the humans. By the time the sun rose, the camp was gone. Smoke rose into the sky, and bodies lay scattered in mud and ash. The regiment pulled back before reinforcements could arrive. Their movements were fast, their retreat clean, leaving no trace behind. When reports reached the council again, panic grew stronger. One leader shouted that Earth had become a threat. Another whispered that the humans fought like no other soldiers they had seen. The laughter that once filled the hall was gone. Now there was silence, broken only by fear. Jack, Daniel, Maria, and Claire regrouped at their hidden camp. They were tired, their bodies worn from battle, but their spirits burned brighter than ever. Jack told them the war had only begun. Daniel said the enemy would never see the jungle the same way again. Maria said fear was their greatest weapon. Claire looked into the dark forest and said more would come, and they would be ready. The jungle was quiet once more, but it carried the echo of fire and gunfire. The special forces knew the enemy was shaken. The council had learned a hard lesson, yet more trials were coming. The regiment was ready to strike again. The council armies had been crushed again, and news of their losses spread fast. Their leaders gathered in silence, no longer bold in their words. They spoke in hushed voices of the jungle soldiers who struck without fear. Some said Earth had only a small force. Others warned that behind that force stood an entire people ready to rise. The mocking laughter was gone. Now the council spoke with unease. Far from their halls, in the heart of Earth's capital, the Queen stood before her people. She had watched reports of the victories. She had read every word from her commanders. She saw that the special forces had done more than fight battles. They had changed the way the world looked at Earth. No longer weak, no longer silent, humanity was now feared. The Queen walked onto a high balcony. Thousands of men and women stood below, waiting for her voice. She wore no crown of gold, only the simple armor of her people. When she raised her hand, silence spread across the square. She spoke with a voice that carried strength. She told them that the council had mocked Earth, but Earth had answered. She said the jungle regiment had struck like lightning and shown the truth. Humans did not fear war. Her words burned like fire in the hearts of her people. Men and women cheered, their voices shaking the ground. Farmers lifted their fists. Workers shouted with pride. Children cried out the names of the soldiers who fought in the jungle. Families offered food, clothing, and weapons to support the regiment. No one in the city spoke of surrender. Every face carried the same fire as the Queen. The message was sent across Earth. Villages, towns, and cities united. Supply lines were built to carry food and arms to the jungle fighters. Blacksmiths forged blades. Engineers built rifles and traps. Farmers filled wagons with grain and fruit. Women and men alike swore they would give all they had to keep the fight alive. In the jungle, Jack and his squad felt the strength of that support. New supplies reached their camp, carried by loyal hands. Bullets, clean uniforms, medical kits, and food gave the soldiers what they needed to fight longer. Jack thanked the runners who brought the goods, but he reminded his squad that each gift came with a price. He said that the people were counting on them. They could not fail. Daniel cleaned his rifle with care, knowing every bullet must count. Maria tested the new blades, her movements sharp and quick. Claire checked maps and scouted the edges of the jungle, marking safe paths for supply lines. Each of them felt the weight of the Queen's command, but none of them turned from it. The council grew restless. They sent spies to learn how humans fought. They sent scouts into the jungle, but few returned. Those who did spoke of shadows that moved too fast to follow. They spoke of traps that snapped like jaws. They spoke of soldiers who seemed to rise from the very ground. Their words only spread more fear. One night, Jack gathered his squad. He told them that the enemy would bring greater numbers soon. He said that fear was now their strongest weapon, but it would not be enough. They had to strike again, harder than before. He pointed to a map, showing a new enemy camp near the river. Supplies flowed through that camp to feed the larger armies. If they destroyed it, the enemy would starve. Daniel agreed and said he would lead the charge through the water. Maria promised to cut through the guards at the outer edge. Claire said she would take the trees once again and fire down from above. Jack looked at each of them and said this battle would carry their names into history. The Queen's voice echoed in their minds. She had declared that Earth would not kneel, that Earth would not be broken. Her words were their fuel. Her command was their duty. They knew they were more than soldiers now. They were the proof of humanity's strength. As the night deepened, the squad checked their weapons and tied their boots. The jungle was dark. The river carried the sound of rushing water, and the air was heavy with the smell of rain. Jack gave the order to move. The squad stepped into the shadows once more, ready to strike at the heart of the enemy. The river camp lay wide and open under the moon. Tents stretched across the banks, wagons stood in long lines, and crates of food and weapons filled the ground. Torches burned through the night, and guards walked along the edge of the camp. They thought numbers would keep them safe, but the shadows of the jungle carried hunters that no numbers could stop. Jack and his squad lay hidden on the ridge above the river. Their eyes studied every corner of the camp. Jack whispered orders, his finger drawing paths in the dirt. Daniel would lead a group through the river, striking the wagons first. Maria would slip around the left edge, taking the guards from behind. Claire would climb the trees and fire from above. Jack would guide the center strike, cutting through the heart of the camp once the chaos began. They moved with silence. Daniel slid into the cold water, his pack high on his back. The river pushed hard against him, but he pushed harder. Behind him, a small team followed, their rifles wrapped in cloth to stay dry. Maria crept low through the tall grass, her knife ready in her hand. Claire climbed a tree that leaned over the camp, her body pressed tight to the trunk as she found her place high above. Jack stayed on the ridge, his eyes never leaving the target. The signal came when Claire's first shot cracked through the night. Guard fell before he could shout. At that same moment, Daniel and his men rose from the river and set fire to the wagons. Flames spread fast, licking across wood and canvas. Soldiers shouted in confusion, running toward the fire. Maria struck from the grass, her knife cutting down guards before they could raise alarms. Jack charged with his squad, their rifles tearing through the camp. The enemy tried to form lines, but fire and fear broke their order. Crates exploded as flames reached barrels of fuel. The river glowed with the light of burning wagons. Claire's shots rained down, each one finding its mark. Daniel threw charges into supply stacks, and more fire filled the night. The camp became a storm. Men screamed as flames surrounded them. Some ran into the river, only to be pulled under by the current. Others tried to fight back, but every shadow held a hunter. Maria moved like a ghost through the smoke, striking with speed. Daniel roared as he tore through the wagons, leaving fire in his path. Claire's rifle cracked again and again, sharp and unbroken. Jack led from the front, his squad pushing deep into the camp, until nothing stood but flames and ruin. The enemy fought, but they fought blind. Smoke choked their lungs, fire blinded their eyes, and fear tore at their hearts. They had believed numbers would save them, but numbers could not touch shadows in the jungle. By the time the sun touched the horizon, the camp was gone. Supplies were ash, wagons were wrecks, and soldiers lay scattered across the mud. Jack gave the signal to retreat. The regiment pulled back into the jungle, vanishing as fast as they had come. They moved through hidden paths, their bodies blending into the green, leaving behind nothing but destruction. When reinforcements arrived at the river, they found only smoking ruins and silence. Back at the hidden camp, Jack looked at his squad. Their faces were black with soot, their uniforms torn, but their eyes shone with victory. Daniel said the enemy had lost not just supplies, but hope. Maria said fear would now follow every soldier who entered the jungle. Claire said the fire tonight would burn in their memories forever. Jack nodded and told them they had struck a wound too deep to heal. Far away in the council hall, voices rose in anger and fear. Reports of the river disaster spread through the chamber. Leaders shouted at each other, demanding answers, demanding action. Some called the humans demons of war. Others begged to end the conflict before more was lost, but no one laughed anymore. Fear had taken its place. The queen received word of the victory and spoke once more to her people. She said the river burned, and with it the enemy's pride. She said that humans had shown the world that no power could break their spirit. Her words filled every man and woman with strength. The fires of war burned, but so did the fire of unity. Jack and his squad sat under the trees that night, the jungle quiet around them. They were tired, but they were not done. Jack told them that the final strike was near, said the enemy would come with their greatest force, and when they did, the jungle would become their grave. The squad listened, ready for the battle that would decide the war. The jungle stood heavy with silence before the last battle. Birds no longer sang, and the air carried the weight of fire and blood. Jack and his squad moved through the dark trees, every step steady, every breath sharp. They knew this night would decide everything. The enemy had gathered their full force at the edge of the valley, ready to strike with all they had left. Jack had no illusions. It would be the hardest fight of their lives. The squad crouched around a map drawn in the dirt. Daniel pointed at the valley floor where rows of soldiers waited with rifles, armor, and heavy machines. Maria marked the cliffs that rose high on both sides, perfect ground for an ambush. Claire said she would climb before the fight began, and her rifle would rain down fear. Jack listened and nodded. He told them that no matter the odds, the jungle was theirs, and they would fight until the last breath. They moved out before dawn. Claire climbed first, her hands cutting into the stone until she found her place above the valley. She set her rifle and waited, her eyes cold. Maria slid along the trees on the right, silent as the night itself. Daniel carried charges strapped to his chest, ready to break the enemy lines. Jack led from the front, his eyes locked on the enemy campfires below. The first shot came as the sun broke the sky. Claire fired from above, and the first soldier fell before he could lift his weapon. Panic rippled through the valley, but before order could return, Jack and his squad charged. Their rifles tore through the lines. Maria struck from the side, her blade finding the weak spots where armor could not save them. Daniel ran forward with charges, hurling fire into machines and wagons. Explosions shook the ground, sending dust and smoke into the air. The enemy tried to form ranks, but every step they took was met with fire. Claire's rifle cracked again and again. Maria cut through the edges like a shadow. Daniel roared as explosions ripped holes in the ground. Jack's squad pushed hard into the center, driving fear deep into the heart of the enemy. But the enemy did not break at once. They fought back with all their might. Gunfire cut through the trees, machines rolled forward, and the valley became a storm of steel. Jack's men fell around him, but he did not stop. He lifted his rifle and charged again, his voice rising above the chaos. Cut. Daniel planted charges on the largest machine, climbing its frame as bullets tore the air. He slammed the detonator and leaped away as fire split the sky. The machine fell in flames, its wreckage crushing the soldiers beneath it. Maria fought hand to hand, her blade red as she moved faster than any eye could follow. Claire's rifle never missed, and with each shot, the enemy lines grew weaker. Hours turned into a blur of smoke, fire, and screams. The valley burned, and the ground shook. Jack's squad fought until their bodies ached, and their rifles grew hot. But at last the enemy lines broke. Men threw down their weapons and fled, machines burned where they stood. The valley became a grave of steel and ash. When silence returned, Jack stood in the center of the ruin. His squad gathered around him, their faces black with soot, their uniforms torn, but their eyes still sharp. Daniel limped with blood on his arm. Maria's blade dripped as she wiped it clean. Claire climbed down from the cliff with her rifle across her back. Jack looked at them and said the war was over. News of the battle spread fast. In the halls of power, the leaders sat in silence. The humans they had mocked had crushed their greatest army. No one dared laugh now. Fear filled their hearts, and respect followed close behind. The name of the jungle fighters carried across the stars, a name spoken with both dread and awe. Back on Earth, the Queen stood before her people once more. She told them that the world had seen the strength of mankind. She said that no one would ever again call humans weak. The people cheered, their voices rising into the night. They knew their warriors had changed the course of history. Jack and his squad sat under the jungle trees that night. The fire crackled low, and the stars shone above. They had lost friends, but their fight had given birth to victory. Jack told them that humans had done what none believed possible. They had faced war without fear, and they had won. The jungle was quiet again, but the memory of the battle would never fade. From that day on, the world knew the truth. Humans were not weak. They were not afraid of war. They were born from a world of struggle,